it's hard because in journalism, right, we're facing deadlines, and it's kind of like one story the next day, another. But I always like to make time to, either reach back out or check in with sources, with people, stories that I've covered, because you don't want people to feel like they're just a piece.
Presented by Sacramento Educational Cable Consortium. You're listening to Lights, Camera, Learn. All right, welcome to another episode of Lights, Camera, Learn. Our guest today is Ignacio Dominguez. He's a reporter with NBCUniversal. Ignacio, welcome.
Hey, Aaron, thanks for having me on.
Absolutely. So the first question I want to ask you is, what's the most interesting story you've covered so far?
Interesting story so far. I would say it has to be, I have two. So
Okay.
before being here in San Diego,
Yeah.
I was in Sacramento, and I worked on this special about rooster fighting in the Central Valley and all across Northern California, which is a huge activity that unfortunately still happens, right? And it's a criminal activity. So we embedded with some rooster fighters in Northern California, and worked on this story over the span of like 6 months, which was pretty incredible and kind of crazy to see, all these operations kind of going on under the scenes. So that was a really interesting story I got to do. Another one that comes right to mind is recently, a few months ago, when I moved to San Diego. Unfortunately, the way of travel for many migrants now is through panga boats. And in November, there was a boat that capsized off the coast of San Diego. And it was just heartbreaking, right? Four
Oh,
people
yeah.
had died in this accident, and they were just trying to come into the country. One of them was actually someone from my last market. So their family was in Stockton, and I
Really?
didn't find, yeah. So it was just crazy, right? So I felt like this sort of connection to that story, and still to this day, I actually messaged with the family because it wasn't weeks after I found out, right, that who was on board that boat and who the family members were. So those are like two super interesting stories.
So those are pretty heavy stories, especially somebody still relatively new in your career. I mean, that
Yeah.
not a lot of people get to talk about that. So the rooster story and the cockfighting, both stories are interesting, but you said 6 months and being embedded with that. What steps did you have to go through to get to that point of gaining those people's trust? Because it is
Yeah,
illegal.
well, it is illegal. Yeah, that's
Yeah,
right. And it's a criminal offense here in California and in all 50 states, really. But it was really challenging. And I think that's why that investigation took so long to kind of get on the air. And it was, messaging back and forth, uh, making contacts with people in the rooster fighting world that I have never, been a part of. So
right.
it was completely new to me. But it took several months to get an interview down with the person that, kind of operates in these sort of fights, that does them on a weekend basis, right? Every week, they're kind of taking part in this activity. And it took some groundwork, really. It was meeting the person here and there. On my time off, I'd drive out, meet with them, just talk, gather information, and really kind of, bring in the whole interview part of it later on. I didn't drop it just then, like, hey, this is a story I'm working on and I want to interview you. It was kind of like a process. It was, yeah, just gathering with them, picking their brain on it, and then saying, hey, I'd love to work on this story. Would you be willing to, you know, be on camera? And obviously, we took precautions, and
Sure.
also,
Yeah.
didn't reveal their identity for obvious reasons. But it was really a lot of groundwork, right, to get a person to speak. And that's sometimes the case in so many stories with journalism, right? And it's first being a human and approaching each story as a human first, and then as a journalist.
Well, I can imagine. I mean, getting these folks trust. But so when the process of doing this story, what was there anything particular you discovered in terms of what motivates them to engage in this kind of activity?
Yeah, well, something super interesting in that interview was that he mentioned that there's this sort of thrill and adrenaline that you feel when you're, fighting a rooster, and typically it's a male-dominated kind of
Sure.
activity. So he mentioned that that was something that really drives them. It's like the power and also the money. It's like $1 million industry here in
Okay.
California and around the US. So it was kind of interesting to see how this is kind of more of an adrenaline thing and a power dynamic for a lot of the people that play it.
Yeah.
And also, there's kind of a cultural identity around it, at least with Latinos and many Hispanics in their home countries. It's something that's still, being played in some cases. And I know in Puerto Rico, there's like a whole stadium dedicated to this sort of activity. So
Really?
it was really interesting, and also for me to see how popular it is in California, and still to this day. I think a few weeks ago there was a huge bust in Sonoma County, so it's
Yep.
something that's
That's right.
alive and
I
well.
remember that.
Yeah, and this is the season of it because there are seasons to the game, uh, which is
Okay, I had
interesting.
no idea. That's crazy.
Yeah.
So, on your story with regard to the folks that perished out in the ocean that were trying to get here, I imagine that was also an emotional story for you too.
Yeah, it was emotional first off because I was like, I think probably 3 weeks into this new job here in San Diego, and I'm still getting to know the community. And I knew that, right, this was a big area that's known for
Yeah.
immigration, obviously being a border town. And this was on a weekend. I'm on the weekend shift. So I got sent out to go check this out, and it had happened the night before. We knew that four people had died, others were injured, and just being in that area where human life was lost at any story, it shakes you, right?
Yeah.
And it was very emotional in the beginning, and it was just hard to understand, right? Like these people are trying to come over here, and on their passage they die, and it was hard at that part already. And then weeks after, it kind of stayed with me. It still stays with me, the story, because
Yeah.
of what I met,
Yeah.
that family that I connected with in my last market, and whose loved one tragically died in that accident. And yeah, it's there's stories like that that stay with you, obviously, because for me, my parents are immigrants, and I understand
Hmm.
the appeal of many people to make their way to the United States for a better life, and
Yeah.
many sometimes they don't make it back.
Right. So, with that kind of a story, Ignacio, how do you somewhat compartmentalize that so you can wake up the next day and do the job that may be a completely different story than that particular story was?
Yeah, I mean, it's really tough, but
Yeah.
you kind of, I think, as you go into the business, you learn to kind of separate probably work from your personal life, as hard as it is. But it does, there's moments where you just remember, and I messaged with that family just this week, right? And it was like, thank you for remembering, our family, and keeping in touch. And, there are little things like that that there's ways where you can separate, right, your personal
Yeah.
and work, but always being a human, once again. It's just,
Absolutely. Yeah, that's pretty special that you did that because I think a lot of folks, having worked in media, would not have taken the time to message those people. They would have just moved on to the next story and not done that. So, kudos to you for being human.
yeah, and I know it's hard because in journalism, right, we're facing deadlines, and it's kind of like one story the next day, another. But I always like to make time to, either reach back out or check in with sources, with people, stories that I've covered, because you don't want people to feel like they're just a piece
Yeah,
for the, right? You
just
you
another
want,
story for you. Right.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, I could see that. So, what is it that motivated you to become a journalist?
Yeah, well, I've always been obsessed with journalism and
Really?
TV, because my family, once again, I come from immigrant parents, and I think so many people that share sort of like my story as well. It's we grow up watching news like 6 p.m. It was like everybody sat down on the couch,
Yeah.
we were eating dinner, and we watched news. And the TV was always on in my home. And I had an idea at an early age, like what journalism was, I guess. I knew there was like reporters and the news and whatnot. But I was just obsessed with like the idea of like, whoa, like someone is in our backyard, telling this story, or look at how like they're on TV, and it was just like such a cool concept. But it was also really informative for my parents, that didn't don't speak English. Spanish news was like a really important, way of connection and to be informed on what's going on in our area. And in my case, it was like the Bay Area. So I knew I always kind of wanted to check into that and see if it was something I could do. And here I am now, a few years later.
No, I think it's great. I mean, so what part did your parents play in either encouraging you or at least making it feel like that was an okay thing for you to pursue?
Yeah, in the beginning, immigrant parents once again. My dad was like, "Oh, are you sure you don't want to try like being a doctor or something?" And I was like, "No, no, like this is what I want to do." And now they're like my biggest cheerleaders,
Oh, I bet.
supporters, and they love everything that I do. And they've been such an important part, obviously, pushing me to go to college, helping me out with that, and just being okay with the crazy life that journalism is, moving from one place to another, and I'm bouncing around all the time, not picking up calls because I'm busy
Yeah.
or I'm working a crazy shift, and yeah.
What do your parents do now?
My parents are retired,
Are
so
they? Okay.
yeah, yeah. So now they live half of their time in Mexico and they
Okay.
live half of their time here in the US. So it kind of works out for us,
Yeah, it
Now,
does.
now we see each other a bit more often because I do live in San Diego, just a
Okay.
bit closer to Mexico.
Right. Yes, it is. So you went to
Yeah.
California Baptist University. How did you pick that particular school and what was your experience like there?
Yeah, well, as we know, CBU isn't really a J school compared to like
Yeah.
Columbia, USC. But what drove me there in part was that I wanted to get out of the Bay Area. I had applied to several colleges. I got into some, but I was like, I want to go to SoCal, and I knew they had a department in journalism. It seemed to be up and coming, and uh, at that point, it was really sold to me. Like I was like, whoa, like they have a studio, and like I'm gonna do what I've always wanted to do, even though it's in college, right? You're just so eager to get out there and do stuff. And that's really what led me to the school was that it was still a small department, and I knew I would have the opportunity to kind of, you know, understand how journalism works and the real world experience by doing these stories in the community. And they had a Spanish segment too,
They
which was,
did. Okay.
yeah, yeah, it was
Okay.
surprising. But it was what really set me to go, to CBU. And I think also the culture of the school, it's quite different to public universities. CBU is a faith-based university, and that played a part as well. And also just having gone through those 4 years at CBU, it was really eye-opening to, meet people that are either, come from a different background or are
Sure.
more closed in, and it was a really good experience, I think, for me when I view it as a journalist, just to meet all these different people at that university. And
Yeah. So what were some of the stories you got to cover while you were a student there?
yeah, well, as a student, I really put an emphasis on like the Spanish segment, and
Uh-huh.
me and like two other Spanish speakers were super involved in, putting out this Spanish newscast. It was going on for a while, but it seemed to like need some more support. And what we did, we were like, well, the Inland Empire, where this school is located, it's almost an hour outside of LA. So
Yeah.
local news, they have like some reporters, I think, out there, but it's not as covered as, areas like LA are. So we had this idea that we're gonna cover local news and we're gonna, inform like Spanish speakers in the area. So we would head out, do these stories, like we had a camera, a mic, and we were just putting stories together about things going on in the community and in Spanish, which we thought was so important because it's a big Hispanic and Spanish speaking
Sure.
population there in Riverside. And we did many stories, many local stories, which was great. They weren't as impactful, I think, as the ones I'm doing
Yeah,
now, but
right.
it was great to kind of do and learn everything about maybe MMJing at that point as well, because it was
Sure.
just all in a camera.
Yeah, I could see that. So then you also had some internships, right? You had one at NBC Nightly News and one with David Muir, correct?
Yeah,
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 what
yeah,
were
yeah.
those like?
Those were amazing opportunities that I think just really solidified that this was what I wanted to do in life, and for the rest of my life really is how I see it. I got both of those opportunities through NHJ, which is the National Association of Hispanic Journalists,
Oh yeah.
has played just a pivotal part in my career. And it was thanks to NHJ that I ended up moving to New York my first time around, and I extended my nightly news internship. And it was with the weekend and weekday team, so it was just awesome to get to, field produce some things, do nice closers, which was nice. The stories, the good news segments that they do at the end.
Yeah.
It's an opportunity, really.
Oh, I can imagine. So when with either one of those internships, when you got those and you got on board there and started working there, were there any like big aha moments where you're going, "Oh, I didn't know this is what they did," or "That's not what I learned in school"?
Yeah, first off, I think it was like the organizational aspect of like a newsroom because
Yeah.
I all I had really known about kind of newsrooms was what I was seeing in my college, and it was like, well, it's only three of us, you know. So when I walked into like a network newsroom, it was like you have field producers, your assistant producers, then there's obviously the EP, and then there's senior producers. So it was kind of crazy to see how many people are involved into, putting out daily stories for the
Oh, I
network.
bet. Yeah. So, given that those experience in terms of internships, what did you learn there that you've brought into your work now?
Gosh, I think being quick and yeah, like
Yeah.
it's crazy how fast, a network crashes pieces because breaking news is always happening, right? And you have to be so fast at writing, but also the way that you approach different stories at the network level. You cover the whole country and sometimes internationally, so I was able to see kind of how correspondents speak to victims that have just lost
Oh, yeah.
everything, and it was on a variety of different topics, but just really analyzing how different correspondents approach stories or how they write. Um, it was like just amazing knowledge that you don't get in a classroom setting, right? Or
Yeah.
even a textbook. It's just, it's such a rare and great opportunity that I think I had in my career that just really changed the trajectory of everything for
I can
me.
imagine. So,
Yeah.
as you've gone through your career so far, Ignacio, are there particular people that you consider mentors either in your past or now? And who would those people be?
Yeah, there's a number of people that I met while I was at NBC News, and they continue being my mentors today. Some of them are producers for Nightly,
Hmm.
and we check in regularly, or I try to go to New York as often as I can, so we
Yeah.
can hang out, talk about life. And they've really seen my career kind of just take off since after that internship, and they've been great mentors for me, just following every step of what I've done. Yeah.
Yeah, I can imagine. So, now that you've gotten into this and you've got some years under your belt, what does a typical day look like for you?
Every day is so different.
Yeah.
I I usually try to prepare, for what I could think I could cover in a day, and it's so funny because I was telling a coworker, "Oh yeah, I need to be like sitting down at my couch an hour before my shift, just ready and reading or seeing what's going on. And, just to kind of be prepared, and because you can go in and pitch something. Usually,
Yeah.
I work the night side right now, and Saturday through Wednesday. So typically we go in, we have a 2:30 meeting where we kind of see what's been covered on the day shift, and then uh, we go around and we pitch for night side.
Hmm.
After we've been assigned, you start making calls and you head out the door. You gather. That typically can take like 2 hours to a long time, maybe
Yeah.
pushing 8 p.m. And then you gather all your elements, your interviews, and everything you need outside. Maybe if you film a look live, you head back to the station and you start writing, logging your sound bites, and then you track and you put the story together, and either you wait for your live shot or you're done for the day.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. So when you do you like to come in with a pitch or do you prefer being assigned a story?
It depends a day, but
Yeah.
typically I love, giving something that maybe I would enjoy
Sure.
covering, and also because it's easier sometimes because you've done kind of the groundwork.
Yeah.
You've maybe reached out to people, so you're not going to go in blindsided, having to spend maybe an hour trying to convince people to talk or, look for sources from scratch. So I like to pitch, and it also sets me up well for the day because I'll know like, oh, this is how my day will go, and I'll be able to have lunch at this time in that interview. But sometimes I like being assigned too, right?
Yeah.
Because I think our EPs here really know what each reporter is good at or has, a good understanding of each topic. So if I'm assigned, I like it as well.
Right. No, I can see that. By the way, do you know Denzen Cortez?
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah, yeah. So Denzen, I interviewed him, and we talked about this idea of either coming in with a pitch or getting assigned. And having worked over at the ABC affiliate here and sat in on a lot of pitch meetings, I was on the marketing side, but I still sat in on them. And it just struck me that if I was a reporter, I'd rather come in with a pitch because, to your point, in his, you would have done at least some homework to get to the pitch, as opposed to
Yeah.
getting assigned a story that you got to turn around in a couple of hours, and do all that work already up
Yeah.
then instead of having done it already. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. So sometimes it's just easier to go in with some pitches, and now it's so easy because you can set up a pitch maybe for Monday,
Yeah.
they'll approve it, and you're ready and set to conquer the day. So yeah, I like going in with some ideas. Not all the time they
Sure.
fall, right? But
Yeah.
it's worth a shot.
So, are there particular stories that you're drawn to when you're creating your own pitch?
Yeah, I really try. And here's the thing too, because I work for the duopoly, so some
Yeah.
days, I do English and Spanish or
Okay.
just Spanish, and uh, they're two different audiences, right? Our Spanish
Yeah.
speakers usually, if you go in with the story for Telemundo, it's a bit more catered to the community, and that's kind of what I think about too when I'm pitching, right? It has to be something that I know they'll buy, and also that will be of service to the community when
Sure.
working on the Spanish side. And that's really many stories in general, but the ones that I usually take interest in are like immigration or human
Uh
interest.
huh.
And I just love talking to people. So really any story, any topic I can kind of do. But those are like the two topics that I choose kind of, or I lean.
Yeah. So, obviously you're bilingual and working with a duopoly that has an English speaking station in Spanish. How else has being bilingual helped you as a reporter?
I mean, it's helped so much.
Yeah.
I think it's so important also here, not only in the U.S., but I think in California,
Yeah.
to know Spanish to communicate with two different audiences. And the reason why I went into Spanish journalism and Spanish TV was because of a mentor that I had. He's the anchor for nightly news Saturdays,
Uh huh.
Jose Ballart.
Oh, yeah.
And I had a conversation with him when I was interning there, and he was like, what you have to do is, conquer the Spanish. Spanish comes first. English will come later. And it's so true because, growing up here in the US, I think, we're surrounded by English all the time,
Yeah.
especially public schools and stuff. But the Spanish sometimes I know is hard for many people to get because there's home Spanish, but then there's very TV on air Spanish
Yes.
you
Right.
have to get down.
Yeah.
Uh, and that's really why I went into Spanish news was because of that. Being bilingual, it opens so many doors, and more when you are proficient in both languages. When you can
Yeah.
communicate, you have the ability to do a live shot in Spanish with no mess ups, and you can also do a live shot in English. That's just a superpower that I think not many people have, right?
Yeah.
And maybe some people have, but they just have to work it, right? They just have to train it. And for me, it's I still train myself in Spanish too. Like I grew up speaking Spanish, and I grew up, in Mexico sometimes. Like I was raised here and there, so I had a Spanish, and I thought I was amazing at Spanish, and I started, and I was like, whoa, I think I need to fix some things, a few things. So there's always room for improvement,
Sure.
but being bilingual has opened so many doors for me, and not only in a professional way and in work and jobs, but also when you're covering stories. Sometimes, the story we're covering, there's only Spanish speakers,
Yeah.
and if it's an NBC reporter that's tagging along or I'm tagging along with them, I'm the only one that kind of communicate and get them to speak. Or sometimes in stories, you also have a better understanding maybe than a person that wouldn't speak
Yeah.
Spanish.
Yeah. So, I think this country suffers from the idea that everybody that speaks Spanish speaks the same kind of Spanish, and that culturally they're all the same too. And obviously that's not the case. So how do you deal with that as you're working on different stories? Let's say you're working with people from Mexico versus the next time they might be from Colombia, or they might be from Venezuela, or they might be from like Puerto Rico. So how do you keep those cultural differences in mind?
Yeah, I think the great thing about that is that my first work at Univision in Sacramento, it was a very diverse
Oh yeah. Yeah.
newsroom in the sense that we had people from Venezuela, Colombia, Mexico, so you kind of adopted a lot of little phrases or sayings because, sometimes they don't mean the same thing. They mean completely other things. So I think that really helped as well. It was kind of a culture shock to me because
I
growing
bet.
up in California, it, typically in the Bay Area, it was kind of just Mexicans, Guatemalans, Salvadorians,
Yeah.
and I wasn't really exposed to all the other Latinos that really, make up this community, and that really helped. It was a culture shock, but it really helped to understand, uh, you know, every community a bit better.
Yeah.
And now here in San Diego, it's mostly Mexican people that live
Yeah.
here.
Yeah, I can
Yeah,
imagine. So how do you keep up yourself? How do you keep up with current news yourself so that
yeah.
you stay on top of what's going on?
I'm such a news junkie. Like I love watching the news. Sometimes when I get off of my shift, it's like midnight, but I'll watch the news. My news is playing like all day, every day. I wake up and the first thing I do, because social media is now such an important, right,
Yeah.
component to news and journalism. I like go through X and I just check everything that's going on, Instagram, scroll through some things. And then the first thing I do is I'll play the Daily by the New York Times
Oh
just to kind
yeah.
of
Yeah.
hear that. And then once I've kind of finished that routine, I transition over and I watch some of the like national news, local news, and then I do some reading before I go into the office. So I check out local papers, national papers, just to see what's going on. Because there's a lot of stories that, come from national news that make their way into local communities as well, and they have an impact or a sort of connection. And
Yeah.
be able to report on those, you also have to have some background knowledge or context on what's going on at a national scale.
Sure.
So always helps to just read up on everything.
Oh yeah. So, one of the things that you're touching on that I think is important is the traits that make a good journalist. And obviously what you're talking about is being informed, but what other traits do you think make journalists in general good, but yourself as well?
I think hustling.
Yeah.
Yeah. you have to be able to move from one topic to another. Sometimes, they'll switch your story up to three times, in one shift, and you have to be able to adapt quickly to every story and know it inside and out, right? Because if you're expected to do a live shot, but you just got there 15 minutes ago, you have to be ready to go. So you have to have that hustle,
Yeah.
in that sense, but also, um, journalism and TV news is kind of like really it's hard, right? It's a hard
Yeah.
industry. So you have to have the hustle to, you know, to where you want to get. You have to be, moving quickly and precisely, and always be in the know of everything as well. And I think perseverance as well. That's a big one. But hustle
Yeah.
and perseverance are like the two that I think of.
What about
Curiosity.
curiosity?
Yeah,
Yes. There you go.
curiosity all the time.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's like a big one. And it's so funny. Sometimes I wonder if all journalists kind of think the same because when I'm driving and I see something, I think about it and I'm like, that could be a story because why is that set up like that? Has that always been like that? So I maybe it's a thing with a lot of journalists, right? You see kind of a story in many things,
Yeah.
and once again, the curiosity I think that you have to have and creativity because now, as we've seen, like TV news kind of change over time and the social media platform kind of have to have that bit of creativity,
Yeah.
in it with all of that.
Yeah. I can imagine. So you had mentioned obviously social media now and then earlier. What part does that play in your job? And either both you mentioned keeping current, but also just in general in terms of communicating back out to folks who might be interested in what you're doing.
Yeah, so unfortunately, I'm really bad at social media. Even though I grew up in the whole age
Oh yeah.
of technology and whatnot, I'm still kind of, getting used to it. But we have like a huge presence with Reels. Like those are such a big
Yeah.
thing because many people now don't have cable. A lot of people don't get or can't sit through a whole package, right?
Mm-hmm.
Our attention span seems to be a bit shorter, maybe 30 seconds or less
Yep.
and and like TikTok, right? Such a popular platform where people, are getting so much information in such a short amount of time. We all live busy lives. So I think the more you can condense a topic and still give it depth and substance
Yeah.
through social media, I think that really leverages you as a journalist because you have the ability to do that and connect with, so many people on a
Sure.
social platform. So, yeah, reels are like a big thing. I think that has,
Yeah,
taken
I could see that.
industry. Yeah.
I could see that. So what about AI? Is the are either stations you're working at use that, and are you using it in what way?
Yeah. So I haven't gotten the
Yeah.
chance to use it. Like I'm not against it, right? But
Right.
I know, like here at our station, it's a duopoly, so English and Spanish, two different teams of producers, different newscasts, but we share elements. And I know they've talked about a script translation AI that makes it easier for reporters to, translate their Spanish script to English, so then they
Okay.
don't rewrite a whole one, but obviously, always with the human eye kind of checking over what is being done. So I know there are some programs like that that have been implemented into the newsroom and other newsrooms I know across the country as well. Like
Sure.
the other one I think is one that makes your broadcast script into a digital article for
Oh,
the
interesting.
right?
Yeah.
Yeah, and a lot of companies and a lot of news stations use that now, and it's kind of disclosed at the end of the article, like, oh, AI was used to, create
Yeah.
this story, and it was looked over by
Right.
obviously digital team. Yeah. So I know AI has been, it keeps growing, and there seems to be a lot of parts to it, and slowly I think the news world is kind of introducing it as well, but obviously always with an extra pair of eyes for
Yeah.
that.
I remember I think it was about 2 years ago, there was this company that was pushing out this whole AI generated newscast where the anchors, the stories and everything were all AI generated.
That's
And
crazy. I feel like that we could probably never get used to that because and a
Yeah,
journalist job could never be taken is my stance
I
because
agree.
the human component you need someone on the ground. A AI person can't really
Yeah.
be on the ground, speaking to people, seeing what's going on, and I think there's always a sense of a threat that AI right is taking a lot of jobs.
Yeah.
uh, but I think in the journalism world at least it's one of those jobs that you need an actual person to be there
Yeah.
to see to speak with people in order to put that on air.
Yeah, I think you're right, Ignacio. I can't see a day when AI would completely take over journalism. I mean, maybe generating story ideas, maybe generating script based on some other, you know, text to audio kind of thing. But yeah, the whole idea of not having any human interaction in the stories you tell, I just don't see how that could have any validity.
Yeah, that sounds yeah.
Sounds awful, doesn't
Yeah,
it?
it sounds awful.
So,
Yeah.
in your career so far, do you have a story that you've seen other folks do that you wish you could have done?
Gosh, maybe not a story, but something I've always wanted to do is like one of those White House press briefings.
Okay.
Those seem just so cool, and just being at the White House, right, as a
Yeah.
reporter seems like a dream. So, not necessarily a story, but maybe something that would be awesome to do at one point in my career.
Yeah. Is that where you see yourself in maybe 5 years? If something you'd like to be at?
I mean, I don't know. I typically don't think down the road.
Yeah.
Like right now, I'm so invested into what I'm doing in here in San Diego and, doing it in English and Spanish. And that's kind of been my focus right now.
Yeah.
I hope that in 5 years from now, I continue doing it in both languages. That's kind of, yeah, where I see myself down the
Yeah.
road.
I can understand that because, I mean, look, you're still pretty new in your career and still trying to determine some of that. And I think having talked with enough journalists, sometimes I think they get so focused on a plan, that they say, okay, in 2 years I'm going to be here, in 3 years I'm going to be here, in 3 years, and they might miss out on something.
Yeah, and I think something that a lot of mentors have told me too is when I was first going into journalism, every everyone's career path in journalism is different.
Yeah,
Everybody has a start that's very different from me or from anyone else, because that's like the beauty in journalism too, is that there's not one correct path, right?
right.
I think that's what makes this field so awesome because everybody has different backgrounds and comes from maybe a whole different, right,
Yeah,
major or industry and then comes into journalism. But you need people from all different walks of life kind of to make up a newsroom and to understand the world around us. I think that's what makes a great newsroom.
I think it does too. So, students that are out there that maybe come from different backgrounds that might want to get into this business, what kind of advice would you give them?
I mean, if you know what you want to do, start hustling now.
Yeah,
When when I was a freshman in high school, I started writing for like the newspaper and I was doing it in Spanish. So I always kind of had the, inkling of like wanting to do Spanish news. But I was taking anything that was around me,
yeah,
and bringing it to leverage myself later on. And it was, something as simple as like a high school newspaper, but I knew I wanted to do it. So for younger people that are interested, you know, look at everything that's around you and also contact people. If there's a journalist that you admire or like their work, DM them, right? Like that's what
yeah,
I would do when I was in college. Like, hey, like my name is Ignacio, like I'm a student journalist, but I really want to do this right as a career. Would you mind like talking, doing a quick Zoom? And I did a few of those when I was younger. Like sometimes I cringe about it now, but like it really helped me to, kind of understand how the whole industry works and, just having, creating mentors too along the way, like gaining
yeah,
mentors is so important. And yeah, for anybody that's younger and that wants to do this, it's no one can stop you. You can make your own path, and you just have to get out there and start doing it.
yeah. Well, and you bring up a really good point because I think that people are tend to get afraid that, oh, I can't talk to that person because they're, I'm young or I'm this or I'm that, and they're too busy. But you're never going to know unless you actually, like you said, reach out to them.
Yeah, and most of the time, I think I want to say every single person in the industry is willing to, share a bit or
Yeah.
help someone out because we were all there. I was there a few years ago, right? And,
Right.
and like I always like to be a resource for other people, even if it's just questions or if I can connect you to someone that is in another position. Maybe you're interested in being a producer,
Yeah.
like I always like to be a resource for anyone that's interested in, doing
Yeah.
anything
Yeah.
because we journalists, yeah.
I think that's great. So, when we work with a lot of teachers here that teach media, some of them teach journalism. What can teachers be doing though to maybe not necessarily do a better job, but do a good job of preparing students to be in this field?
Yeah, I think anything real world experience
Yeah.
in the sense if it's a classroom, get your students maybe out there, get them to do MOS, right? Men on the street or
Yeah.
stories that are in the community, right? Because when you are out there and you're doing something, you just grow a love for it because you're out there and there's something that just, comes into your body. And you're like, whoa, like I love this that I'm doing, right? When you're out there interviewing someone and it's very hands-on. I think when classrooms kind of incorporate that, any journalist just is more motivated to do it. And I think
Sure.
teachers can really incorporate
Oh
that.
yeah. Do you
Yeah.
think I mean, you obviously went to through a formal journalism program. Do you think that was really important to your career, or do you think you could have gotten to that where you're at now without that?
Uh, uh, yes and no. I mean, there's things like media line ethics, right, that you should
Sure.
definitely take. But I think talking to people is something that you kind of just learn to
Yeah.
do outside, right? You don't have a class, or maybe some colleges do, where they teach you how to interview. I know I had one class around that, but it doesn't compare to when you're really
Right.
interviewing someone, right? Um, so I think, yeah, you can definitely learn how to do journalism without maybe the classes, but there's components, right, like that are crucial, like the one that
Yeah.
I'm the ethics and around all of it. Um, but it all kind of is a learning. It all is a learning experience in itself. Your whole career, I think you're learning every day how to do different things, whether it's technical or
Oh
something
yeah.
speaking to people.
Yes.
You really just learn it throughout the way, and I think that's the beauty of journalism, right? You have to like you learn something new every day, whether it's the topic or about another person. So that's the beauty in this.
Yeah. What's have you ever thought of another career?
Not anymore, but before journalism,
Yeah.
yeah, I'm too far down this road to think about another
Right.
career. No, but before this, I really wanted to be a pilot, and I think I
Really?
just wanted to do that because the idea of traveling and being in one city the next day and then another, the following was what kind of intrigued me about it.
Yeah.
Adrenaline probably of working crazy hours, and I'm kind of doing that now. So
Yes, you yes you are. I guess if you look out then future wise, you mentioned covering the White House, and kind of the stories that you've covered already. You could become a correspondent and kind of get that same adrenaline rush. I mean, especially these people that cover war
yeah.
stories and are on the front line. I can't even imagine what that has to be like. Have you ever considered that?
Yeah, I have.
Yeah.
It may be down the road, right? I have a lot of mentors and friends that are correspondents as well, and
Yeah.
they do mention that it's kind of crazy. Sometimes you don't even know what time zone you're in because you were just in this city and now you're in this one,
Yeah.
and it's crazy, right? That lifestyle. That I think there was something I heard that typically correspondents are only in their home like 2 times a month or something like that. I
I
mean, it
bet.
depends each one, right? But you're living out of a suitcase, and it's a crazy, right? Probably for someone else to hear, maybe like awkward to hear that, right? But
Yeah.
for me, I'm like thrilled about it. Like that would be like a dream job. Yeah.
See that I think that just has to be in your DNA or something in your
Yeah,
personality because look, there are people that go into journalism that never want to do that.
yeah, yeah,
Right? They're just fine staying in the same market, and maybe they become an anchor, and they're fine being that. And even though they have to do some reporting, they're fine doing that. So I think there's a personality characteristic that wants to do what you're talking about at that level.
yeah. Some people definitely want to live normal lives, and other people
Whatever that
want,
normal means today, but yeah, I get it.
yeah,
Yeah,
and other people just, yeah,
yeah,
want to be on that side.
yeah. I could see that. So, what's the best advice you've ever gotten?
The best advice, uh, worry about what you're doing now.
Yeah,
Give it your all in the sense of journalism. Give it your all where you are at now, and then worry about what's to come later. But, focus on right now. And that's been so important because, like we had talked about previously, right? In journalism, every reporter kind of has like a final destination or where they want to go.
yeah.
They worry a lot about the path, but that kind of, if you're you know, just tied up to that, you kind of lose sense of what you're working on now, right? And I think that's the best advice I've gotten is just worry about yourself and worry about what you're doing in
Yeah.
the moment,
Yeah.
and everything else will have its time, right? And when it's ready to be yours, it will be yours.
I think that makes sense. Have you ever had any advice that you thought was the worst advice and it ended up being the worst advice you ever got?
It wasn't the worst advice, but I think it was the worst comment one time I got in one of my internships, and it was like, "Are you sure you want to do this? Like, it's."
Oh boy. Okay.
Yeah. And I think a lot of people that are, burnt out and obviously have done this for
Sure.
40 plus years now, that kind of tends to be their reaction, right? Because journalism is changing so much. And, a lot of times you're away from your family for
Yeah.
long periods of time. You work crazy schedules and, sometimes you question, right? Is this what you really want to do? And I got that comment once, and it didn't really struck me as anything. I was kind of like, yeah, this is definitely what I want to do.
Well, I think that speaks highly of how committed you were already to this career because some people might have taken that going, oh, maybe I shouldn't be doing it. It's because this person's saying that. Maybe I shouldn't be here.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. I think that's another component too that you have to have. I think as a journalist, that commitment, right, to I think in some ways you're really marrying the job, right?
Yeah.
And journalists that get into this field, you're doing it for the love of the craft. It's not really all, because of the pay sometimes. It's
Right.
typically because you love doing what you're doing. And journalism, I will always say, is one of the most beautiful jobs ever because every day is different. You're learning something and you're meeting new people. And maybe other jobs have that too, but I think it's not as cool
Yeah.
as being.
I think that's true. Do you think about the impact your stories make on the folks that are listening to them?
Yeah, and sometimes, either at my last work or here, I've had, some viewers say like, "Oh, thank you, like
Yeah.
for what you're doing, and thank you for, keeping us informed." And that for me is just so important because every
Yeah.
viewer, every person that, has that thought or comment, it means a lot because, my parents are those people still to this day, right? That
Sure.
feel like that towards our local journalists. And uh, I do think a lot about when I'm putting this story together, right? What this
Yeah.
will mean for the person on the other side of the screen. So
Yeah.
yeah,
I think that's great. So if you were going to go back to Ignacio in high school, what advice would you give yourself?
keep doing what you're doing. You're
Yeah.
doing great, and keep having that hustle and that determination because it'll get you places that you would have never imagined you'd be in, or newsrooms, that you would never think you'd be in. You're gonna get there, and you're doing everything right.
Yeah.
Um, yeah.
Do you think so? 5 years from now, would you say the same thing to yourself? I mean, that's projecting a
Definitely,
lot.
yeah. I know it's hard, but I continue to tell myself like sometimes we get lost and, we're always busy, but tell
Yeah.
myself, if you're doing the right thing, you're okay. And you're doing the right thing.
Yeah. That's
Yeah.
great. So, any last words, Ignacio, for the folks out there?
I would say anyone that wants to jump into journalism, do it. We need a lot of journalists in the world, and we need people from different walks of life and from different communities because that's what makes an amazing newsroom. And if this is something you want to do, you can start doing it today. Now we have so many platforms where you're able to, inform either your local community, your online community, and it's all literally in a cell phone, right? So uh, go out there and start telling stories and also reach out to people if this is something you want to do. Everybody's open to speaking and sharing a bit of some sort of wisdom or
Yeah.
connecting you to an opportunity because a lot of times in this field as well, it's who you know. So growing your network and meeting people will get you eventually to where you want to be.
Yeah. Oh, I think that's great. Great advice to end this. So thank you, Ignacio, for joining us. This has been really wonderful talking with you.
Thank you, Aaron. It was a great time. Great chat.
All right, great. Well, listen, that's it for this episode of Lights, Camera, Learn. You can catch us on any of the popular podcast platforms and also support us on Patreon. Or you can go to our website at www.secctv.org. Till the next episode, make it a great day. Thanks.